Welcome to White Pill Radio, the every other episode version of Theology on Air, where we look at current events through the Christian worldview. I like to say that this is post-apologetic, ultimately hopeful, applied theology that does indeed look at the hottest of the hottest news off the press. And we look at it from a Christian point of view. We try to analyze what's good, bad, right, wrong, all of that. Normally, Sarah Stone is here. She is the Grand Poobah, of course, of Theology by the Pint, but she could not be here today, so we are bravely carrying on without her. But Sarah, know that you are deeply missed. But do check out theologybythepint.org to learn more about what Theology by the Pint is. We hope that you're already subscribed to the podcast, to the YouTube channel, all that kind of good stuff. It does help and goes a long way in helping the ministry, and hopefully you stay up to date on all the latest talk that comes from this ministry. Obviously, we have great live events every month now around craft beer, where we talk about really interesting moral, theological, philosophical topics. So if you're in Houston, you like to talk theology shop, you won't want to miss it, theologybythepint.org. By the way, I like to say that these episodes of Theology on Air, White Pill Radio, are blessed talk, but not happy talk. So you're going to have to talk right into that microphone. I'll bug you about it if you don't do it enough.
I'm here.
But with me are two voices and friends and guests that our audience should know well. Ken and Austin, why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Ken, I'll let you go first.
Hi, I'm Ken. I'm an accountant, and I like theology.
And I like to say, he's one of those lay people that reads a lot of theology. So, knows a lot about theology. And he's our resident. Let's just say he doesn't really trust the government. So, fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Austin.
Well, I'm from Waco, so... my name's Austin Freeman. I'm an assistant professor of theology and the chair of the Department of Apologetics at Houston Christian University. And the views expressed on White Pill Radio are not necessarily the views of Houston Christian University, unless you like them, in which case they are, and you should come and study with us.
There you go. Yes. I don't really represent First Lutheran either.
That's why I don't tell you guys where I work.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm Evan, by the way. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran here in Houston. So, and our listeners will have just listened. The most recent episode of Theology on Air was Austin's talk about demonology, which he did like 3 months ago, but for scheduling reasons, it just kind of getting pushed back. And
it was a good one.
Anyway, yeah.
Spiritual warfare, I think.
Spiritual warfare, yeah. So quite interesting. Anyway, let's jump in. We got a lot of topics. I guess we're going to start with the
hottest of the hot topics.
I heard you say that.
Yeah. Wow, I didn't put two and two together on that.
I mean, we both looked at each other and thought,
y'all thought I was way more clever than I really am. Anyway, in all seriousness, it's the story of a soldier who lit himself on fire, self-immolating himself, died tragically in the process. But Ken, tell us a little bit about this story.
So yeah, he was a U.S. airman. He lit himself on fire, apparently for the cause of a free Palestine. And this was an interesting one because I roll around on leftist Twitter and leftist Reddit sometimes. And one of the most frustrating things about this is that you get two completely different narratives, depending on, whether you're reading the straight news or, whether you dip into the lefty parts. Uh-huh. So y'all saw the video, right? Or at least photographs of it.
I did watch the video, the blurred video.
It was,
but the audio was there. And yes, as he is burning, he says "Free Palestine."
Yeah, a couple times. Yeah, and one of the most frustrating things is that on lefty Twitter, there was a cropped picture of the cop pointing the gun at him. And it was cropped because if you go find the same picture elsewhere, just out of frame, are the guys with the fire extinguisher about to put him out, right? And obviously, whether he's a cop or not a cop, I would want somebody with a gun trained on a guy lighting himself on fire so that he doesn't either run into a building,
right. He's a weapon,
or run into a crowd, right?
Clearly mentally unstable. Who knows what he can do?
Well, that's my second problem, too, is that people are hailing this guy as a hero. And I'm going to go on a kind of long tangent, and then I'm going to shut up. But this is my biggest problem with Peter Parker foreign policy, right? Because you've got
Spider-Man?
Yeah, you've got two conflicting idioms, right? Great power comes great responsibility, or to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? And right now, we have completely gobbled up the Peter Parker foreign policy, which is, with great power comes great responsibility, and every problem in the world is America's problem.
Oh, right, because we have the most power.
And so this guy, in his delusional state of mind, and I don't really know how frustrating it is to call somebody like a school shooter, guy lights himself on fire, or even a person that commits suicide, right? Mentally ill, right? Because then
He certainly knew what he was doing.
Exactly.
If you watch the video, it's. I was actually shocked at how calm he was.
But what he thinks he's trying to do is get America to do something about Palestine. And my biggest frustration with that is how, like, I don't want an America that could do very much about Palestine. I don't want America that could, I assume he probably wants us to either pressure or invade Israel to get them to stop the bombing campaign in Gaza. And that's the frustrating part is, like, honestly, he thinks that what he is doing is going to affect some sort of change, either in the populace calling for the government to do something. And I just don't think we should have ever gotten to the point where he even could think. Now, crazy people are going to do what they're going to do, but, like, he thinks that being part of the U.S. Army, he can affect some sort of change.
I mean, it's an interesting question, like, was he crazy? Okay, to put it pedantically. And on the one hand, anyone who lights themselves on fire is, a little out there maybe. But on the other hand, like, he's also kind of like a true believer who knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it out. He had forethought. He was in the intelligence community, by the way. He did have some clearance. And there is a story. Now, I can't say this is 100% true, but that he had knowledge that American troops were in the tunnels, fighting alongside Israel. And that's classified information. They also found his account on Reddit where he basically talks about the extinction of all Jews. So this is
like
a guy
advocating for the extinction of all Jews? Okay.
Like, not just from the river to the sea, but like point blank saying.
I actually haven't seen that part.
Yeah. It's his Reddit account. It's been certified. So, the other thing though is, like, we live in a world of all this technology. AI I would think that it wouldn't be hard to train an AI to basically say, dig up every amount of information on Evan McClanahan that's out there on the web. And it could, like, scour Facebook, and it could find passwords, and it could, like, find anonymous accounts that are linked to my, whatever. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it couldn't get behind a VPN. But this guy was pretty openly out there, easily findable, and he's in our military. You know what I'm saying? And he's saying these things in our military. I'm not saying I necessarily want AI to do that, but my point is that what concerns me is that, is he the new breed of, radical that's, like, walking among us and is quite, like, normal, like, quite convinced this is the way to fight the power,
Well, I mean, the recruitment efforts among the military, this is a different story perhaps, but we've got the generational military families, which have been, by and large, conservative, right-leaning,
often Southern,
Second Amendment, often Southern.
Flyover.
Yeah. They have just tanked in terms of military recruitment. And so who is the new face of the United States military? Is it any representation based on the transgender, differently colored hair? Right? They're changing their recruitment strategy because the people that they could formerly rely upon to enlist are no longer doing so. They feel that they're unheard. They feel that they're no longer represented. There is a different constituency to the military as far as I know. Now, what's interesting is this guy seems to be heavily against the United States and what it's doing. I don't know. I haven't gone on his Reddit. Was he always like that? Did he join the military to change it from the inside?
Seems like he was in there for a while.
Was he quote unquote radicalized after he enlisted?
No, I don't. That I don't know. I mean, there is video of him, serving soup for, like, a LGBT organization or something. I'm not trying to read too much into that, but he was clearly very dedicated to what I think we can safely say are leftist causes. Yeah. So,
well, again, my point about the government and the military being way too big. If they're having recruitment problems, it means they're trying to recruit too many people and they're lowering their standards, right? Like, I would rather we have just a bunch of smaller militias, but if we're going to
300 Spartans,
if we're going to have a military, I would like it very small for national defense to be able to really weed out the army in Joshua who's looking down while they're drinking out of the stream, right? Instead of having a government and a military so big that we have to accept so many people because, like you said, recruitment is not what it used to be. Right?
Yeah, I mean, they'll tell us we need $1 billion a year for the military, and that's a lot of money. I mean, $1 trillion.
You can't fill up the number of boots that you've ordered.
Yeah. Well, the Bible talks about not having a standing army in the Old Testament. That seems pretty wise, right? Because the problem with a standing army is that they're bored. Let's go send the boys off somewhere. Let's go find a war to go fight. But when you need a military, if you need a military for a just war, defensive purposes, then you round up the troops literally and you go off to war. That's what the Revolutionary War outfit was. So I think that would be some wisdom. It would probably never happen, but I think there'd be some wisdom in that. I just today in our church newsletter, I wrote an article about rethinking conscientious objectors, and it kind of forced me to go back into my seminary days when my kind of hippie professor was talking about how he kind of more or less bravely stood against the Vietnam War in the pulpit, in the 60s, and he caught heck for it from all the World War II guys, who, said, hey, we had to do our duty for God and country, and you have to do the same. Forget this conscientious objector stuff. And as a 20-something-year-old in seminary, I was like, that's right. These hippies trying to, but now I'm a little bit older and I have a 12-year-old son.
So you've always been a boomer.
Yeah.
When you were little.
Yeah, I guess so. Now I'm a little older and I have a son. We're fighting wars all over the place. And I'm thinking the draft is, like kind of on the table to some degree.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because we aren't hitting our recruiting goals. The people in the military apparently hate America. And I really worry that we could have a draft again. And I don't think we're involved in just wars. I don't think the Ukraine war is a just war. It's at least Europe's problem first. Can we say that? We're, I don't know, in the Red Sea now. Wait. We've got China and Taiwan. And
rewind.
Yes.
You don't think Ukraine is a just war?
I do not.
For America to be in.
Right.
But for the Ukrainians defending their country, that's...
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you. Yes. However, I think
it's important.
I think that Ukraine has largely been used by Western powers. The word Ukraine means, borderland. It literally was the borderland between East and West. It was that it served kind of a purpose in that role. Not to go into the whole, not to do a Vladimir Putin 30-minute history.
I will start talking about the Holy Orthodox Church in Kiev back in the Middle Ages.
Oh, there you go. Anyway, I'm just saying that, not everything has to be our fight, but we've involved ourselves. So to actually pull back, and even to take a bigger picture of it, I think that we are due for massive reform, Reformation level reform of understanding our own country. Because I think a lot of what our country does is unconstitutional. It's a fourth branch of government, the administrative state. All these agencies are not constitutional. Our military isn't supposed to be this. So yeah, it's time to pull back in a major, major way.
Here's what I kind of wanted to ask.
Hey guys, Sarah here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is an amazing podcast episode, but I just wanted to tell you that Theology by the Pint is growing. We are now a 501c3 nonprofit organization and we're expanding. This coming year, with your help, we'll grow our reach by adding events in multiple Houston suburbs, as well as launch a youth version. Don't worry, those will be pints of iced coffee, not beer. We're adding follow-up conversations to reach the spiritually curious and the unchurched. We're also growing our connections and partnerships with more local churches, and you can help us grow by praying for us, by telling your friends or church about us, and of course, by partnering with us financially. To donate, go to theologybythepint.org/give. If each of our podcast listeners gave $100, we would reach our annual budget right then. Consider donating today. Okay, enjoy the rest of the show.
Colonel Selena Noyes, the commander of the 70th ISR wing, it says in this article that the ISR stands for Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. That's the group that he was in. She says, "We extend our deepest sympathies to the family and friends of Senior Airman Bushnell. Our thoughts and prayers are with them, and we ask that you respect their privacy during this difficult time." Now that's interesting to me for several reasons. Number one, this airman has, on paper, committed treason. Right? He has abandoned his duty. He has violently protested against the actions of his military branch. Mm-hmm. And he caused shame to be brought upon his service. So that's weird that they're kind of saying, let's just sort of give them some space. Now, from the Christian side, I kind of like that this is the response because it's very humanizing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, this puts him as a human first and not as a cog in the military-industrial process. Mm-hmm. But as you're saying, the World War II guys versus the Vietnam guys, there is something to be said from voluntarily submitting to a higher duty that requires you to sort of sacrifice your own personal interests. So I don't know. I think it's weird and strange that this is the language that's being used in the official statement. Our thoughts and prayers are with them, even. That's a strange phrase for modern 21st century American military to use. Nothing really to say about why he did it. No seeming act of censure or criticism for him doing it, despite the fact that this is clearly an anti-military and an anti-American policy move that he has publicly done.
I'm going to take another position. This seems kind of like a canned response anytime like somebody kills himself in the military, which like, you know, I got a buddy who was in Iraq and a couple of his friends from Iraq killed themselves. Yeah. And like, this kind of seems like what they would send out to anybody.
Which makes it worse then, if this is just like the form letter that they send and they're not going to...
Well, that's why thoughts and prayers is such a punchline. It's because it's used all the time, right? Yeah.
But I will say again, I mean, lost, and we've talked about it many times on this show, whenever we talk about the Israel-Palestine situation, but almost instantly after October 7th, Israel became the bad guy, you know, and here's another example of someone who is not only committed, but committed to the point of burning himself alive or burning himself to death, to the cause that Palestine is the righteous state in need of freedom from Israel oppression, when it was Palestinian, you know, terrorists who went in and burned children alive and raped women in front of their families and murdered over 1,000 people. And, you know, so, you know, I think if Sarah were here, she'd definitely want me to say that it is odd that there continues to be, it's not just odd, it's wrong, it's evil, it's gross, that there's this inversion, not to justify everything Israel's doing or our involvement there, but, you know, that Palestine just becomes a victim. I don't know.
Well, you said violent treason, and you said Palestine invaded, like, Israel, and I'm the anarchist, so, like, I hate the blood-soaked monsters in Hamas that, you know, went and slaughtered the kibbutz and the, you know, the music festival. And I also hate the blood-soaked monsters in the Likud party and the IDF that are, you know, engaging in this horrible bombing campaign. It's not Palestinians that are doing this, right? Palestinians are the innocent people being bombed, just like the innocent people in the kibbutz that were murdered too, right? Yeah. I'm on, Treebeard. I'm on nobody's side because, like, you know, nobody's on the side of the people.
Well, so but you know, then we have to talk about Nazis then, right? Because, you know, we firebombed the good people of Dresden, you know, or the good people. I don't think that was
a good idea.
Or the good people of Tokyo. So we're now kind of in a just war, you know, conversation. So
it is an open question to what extent the people of a regime are complicit in the acts of a regime. I mean, I look at stories coming out of Gaza where you've got child soldiers that are strapping bombs to themselves, or young girls that are stabbing policemen. Why are they doing that? Is it because they are sold out for the cause? Is it because they're facing social pressure or threat or blackmail in order to do that? I don't know. That's what's so scary about this whole situation is we can't know. We cannot know. This conflict, because it's being waged primarily through social media, we have no idea what's actually happening. We've already seen with the hospital bombing, for instance, there are false narratives being spun.
You mean the first one? Yeah. Not the Al-Shifa hospital, but the earlier one.
Spun on both sides. Yeah. There are fake posts. There are doctored videos. Who knows who's telling the truth? That's what's scary. I think this is the first, maybe not the first, but this is the first major instance of a post-truth war.
Yeah.
I know what you're going to say.
What?
Gulf of Tonkin, Operation Northwoods. Like, But come on, okay. Like, post-truth wars?
Yeah, truth is the first
casualty of war. I mean,
so I don't mean
but you're saying in kind of like real-time information.
Yeah,
or,
in terms of we now live.
What do you mean?
Well, so we now live in the age of instant information globally. We live in the age of AI, where it used to be that you could trust your eyes, and if you send somebody to the Gulf of Tonkin and they come back with pictures of war crimes, then you say, "Oh, dang, we got to do something."
Well, it's a false flag, but yeah.
If you send the going back to Vietnam, the journalists that are doing real work there to expose the sort of stuff that the United States is doing, that's proof. Pictures are no longer proof. Videos are no longer proof.
It's funny.
Audio recordings are no longer.
It's funny. Just this week, I stumbled on a. It's the very famous picture from Vietnam of a guy in the street, and he has a gun. He's about to execute another guy in the street. You would know it if you saw it. Anyway, it's a very famous photo of an execution taking place in Vietnam. And the photographer, basically said, yeah, everyone misunderstands that photo. It's like I wasn't really on the side of the guy getting shot in the head. He was a communist who had participated in, I don't know. I don't want to smear the guy, but he had committed war crimes, and he was getting his just comeuppance in the chaos of war. And I wasn't necessarily saying he was a victim or what have you. I was just saying this is what's going on. So, but that's an image, that obviously went a long way. To tie it all together, in Vietnam in the mid-'60s, many Buddhist monks were self-immolating. They were burning themselves alive, and it was a total scandal. It was part of the reason that we felt this pull to go in and do something, because there was a massive conflict there. And it's kind of forgotten now, but yeah.
And again, their government, the people that claim to represent them, were the ones that were, engaging in some of these atrocities, and they were petitioning their government to do something because their government, actually they were petitioning them to stop doing something. In this case, he's petitioning the government probably to do something, right?
Yeah.
And again, I don't want a government that big.
Or he's petitioning the people that are going to see this on the news to pressure their government to do something. Whatever it is, he's trying to manipulate public opinion, I think, more than he's trying to directly manipulate the government. But it ultimately adds up to the same thing. Yeah. Speaking of Vietnam and self-immolation, Time magazine, by the way, released an article by, I'm not going to try to pronounce that name, Burga and Shaw, I'll just use their last names.
Okay.
That talks about the practice of political self-immolation, and they write, the practice of self-immolation dates back centuries, according to ancient Hindu tales of Sati, the wife of a Hindu god who got married without her father's approval. Some retellings of her life say that Sati burned herself to death on her husband's funeral pyre, and are used as justification for the practice of ritual suicide that has long been banned in India. Self-immolation was also seen as a sacrificial act committed by Christian devotees who chose to be burned alive when they were being persecuted for their religion by Roman Emperor Diocletian around 300 AD.
Interesting. So it's got a long history.
Yeah.
So is that what this guy was tapping into?
Yeah. The Christians who chose to be burned alive by the emperor.
Well, so that's the question.
Well, I assume it's like either convert or die, right? It's either like renounce your faith or be burned alive. So that is in some sense a choice.
Yeah. But they're also, they didn't take themselves and their gasoline-soaked clothes to a public place and decide that they were going to end their lives. This comes to them, and they remain resolute in their beliefs. Yeah. They're not seeking out their own death.
Well, part of what has been interesting has been the response to this guy. He's been lauded as a hero by many, and he's fighting for what he believes in. He's dying for a cause, and we joked before we were starting, some people said, "Hey, rest in power," and other people are like, "No, he was white. He can't rest in power." So you literally have people saying, like, even what he did isn't good enough, because his sacrifice isn't worthy. But I will say this, as Christians, we might find ourselves in a position. Well, we will definitely find ourselves in a position to sacrifice. Period. Because
in this world you will have tribulation.
Yes, even if it's you choose to give money to the church, so that delays when you'll get a new car or something like that. There will be some level of sacrifice that every Christian will be called to. In some circumstances, at the end it could be martyrdom. One of the so I think this guy kind of pulls up this question of like, to what degree is dying for a cause, a good thing? What is a cause worth dying for? How do you go about orchestrating that? If you find yourself in a position where you're, say, surveilled by the government, or you're under pressure, or if you look at, like, again, not to bring up the Nazis, but in a situation where Christianity is sort of illegal and you're being surveilled, and do you deny Christ to save your life, or that sort of thing, or the Donatist controversy, right, where people forsake to Christ to survive.
New Shogun series is out. Those of y'all that want to research the history of Christianity in Japan and the Fumie and
is that what it's about?
Well, it's right before all of this stuff happens. So Shogun is set immediately before the period in which silence is set.
I
okay.
love Silence.
I hate
Have
Silence.
not
What a
seen
great
it yet.
movie.
Have not seen it yet.
It's incredible.
It's a great movie, but it's a terrible representation of Japanese Christianity.
Okay.
Anyway,
Well, I think that it's just I do think there is this fissure, and I was saying that I'm in kind of an email dialogue with someone who had mentioned that my sermons were sort of too political, and my argument is that Christians, need to be engaged in the culture because we do want to have influence in the culture. We want our worldview to be represented and defended in the culture because we want, to prosper, and we want our children to be safe. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes there's a fatalistic attitude where Christians will be like, oh, well, let's just let it all go to crap and we'll die, and the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And there's kind of a fatalism, and I don't like the fatalism. I want us to be out there arguing for our point of view.
The Evangelion, the gospel, is political. Jesus is Lord.
Right.
Has an implicit Caesar is not that comes after that, right? Like the gospel has always been political.
Yeah. It will definitely have social, cultural, political connotations. It's unavoidable. Yeah. So you might as well wade in and get dirty. So
well, this is what's been perplexing me is this is what he believed his life was worth.
You're saying
Airman Bushnell said, I choose to die in order to do this particular act. How effective did he believe this act was going to be? Why did he believe that him ending his own life was worth this?
Yeah.
So clearly this is some issue of ultimate value, ultimate meaning for him in order to give his life in this sense. What was it about being on fire and saying free Palestine that he felt was worth not continuing in 20, 30, 40 more years of other forms of protest?
I respect it a heck of a lot more than killing somebody else to get your political point across,
there's
right?
There's hierarchies of value here.
Right.
But
but
I respect more doing peaceful protests and lobbying senators and trying to create reform than I do a grand symbolic gesture that literally, this is what's tragic, is in 2 weeks, no one is going to remember this.
By the time we're talking about it, it's already, yesterday's news. But it's...
So what is the sacrifice that is of ultimate significance? That's what we've got to ask ourselves. I don't know if I don't know him. I don't know his heart. But it looks like he certainly was trying to find something that his life was worth. Something that gave his life meaning. Yeah. This is what he ended up with.
Yeah. Well, I think one of my questions, then we'll move to the next topic too, but it's like, I am concerned he is actually a fairly typical 20-something in America who is committed to, broadly speaking, rather extreme, leftist causes. And I hope he's not like an opening salvo of, suicides or these kind of massive protests about these things that they do perceive to be of ultimate value when we don't think they are. So I worry about that because the way that sometimes people talk about racism or the freedom of Palestine or sexism or trans issues, they talk about like ultimate human rights, like the most important thing ever.
Well, there's nothing else. So C.S. Lewis has this quote, I forget where it is. He says, look, if you are a secular materialist, then you should be a fascist or a communist because the state will outlast you. Yeah. The state is the thing that you can give your life to, which is of more enduring value than your transitory existence. But if you are a Christian and you believe that you have an immortal soul, states are flashes in the pan compared to your enduring life in Christ or in damnation. So,
but they do matter.
Yeah,
and
this is they matter.
This is the thing about the people going towards martyrdom too quickly. It's like they don't work within the
they don't believe in an immortal soul.
Yeah.
In which case, what else is there that's going to have ultimate value than the political?
Yeah. Last word.
Oh, I was going to say counterpoint to Lewis, who is brilliant always, but like Ayn Rand was a rabid atheist, right? And had a very, very consistent moral framework to be anti-state, whether it be fascist or communist. Her,
ethical egoism, yes.
Objectivism.
Ayn Rand, this is Atlas Shrugged, The Virtue of Selfishness, Howard Roark, what was that? The Fountainhead.
Not Christian, but it is intellectually consistent for somebody who is internally selfish to not seek out government and to actively be opposed to them. So.
I'd rather live in an egoist world than a moocher's world, to use her language. But I'd rather live in a Christian world.
about
Amen.
both. But
Okay, let's talk about Indiana.
So this sort of came across my desk a brief moment before we scheduled this. Indiana bill threatens faculty members who don't provide, quote unquote, intellectual diversity. Senate Bill number 202 in Indiana, sponsored by State Senator Spencer Deary, who is a Republican. The bill, I'll just quote the snippets of it that's being reported here from InsideHigherEd.com. It says that the bill is pushing towards what it calls intellectual diversity, defines that term as, quote, multiple, divergent, and varied scholarly perspectives on an extensive range of public policy issues. Further down in the article, it says, public institutions that have diversity offices or diversity-focused positions must include in their missions, quote, programming that substantially promotes both cultural and intellectual diversity. And they're making the subscription to this a key element in tenure decisions and hiring decisions and so forth. So it's talking about that these schools must pass policies to deny promotion and tenure to faculty members if, based on past performance or other determinations by the Board of Trustees, the faculty member commits one of three transgressions. And I'm going to read all of these because this is important for the cachet of the story. Being unlikely to foster a culture of free inquiry, free expression, and intellectual diversity. Being unlikely to expose students to scholarly works from a variety of political or ideological frameworks that may exist within and are applicable to their discipline. Being likely, when teaching or mentoring, to subject students to political or ideological views and opinions that are unrelated to the faculty member's discipline or the course. What does all this say? If a faculty member does not foster a culture of free inquiry, expression, and intellectual freedom, if a faculty member does not expose students to multiple different viewpoints from both political and ideological frames, and if a faculty member is committed to indoctrinating students into views and opinions which are not related to the subject that they teach, the faculty member may face disciplinary consequences, may be denied tenure, etc., etc. Anything sound controversial yet?
Well, I'm guessing this is basically the Empire Striking Back, if you will, against DEI.
Well, it's part of that. Mm-hmm. But in general, this idea of intellectual freedom, intellectual diversity, I mean, that's sort of what we want in higher education, right? We want multiple positions.
Well, that's what DEI is, diversity, equity.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway.
So the interesting thing is the response.
I only printed off 4 pages.
Well,
I'm sorry. You might need the 5th page.
No, I have the response
somewhere.
Okay. The response here is from a joint statement by Purdue, West Lafayette, Indiana University. These measures would severely constrain academic freedom. Leah Bishop, an AAUP member. The bill is a blank check to fire people based on identity or politics. Robert H. McKinney, School of Law professor, Professor Bishop, it is nakedly about censoring speech. It is nakedly about punishing. Bishop says intellectual diversity is anti-diversity.
This reminds me of like in, say, this may still be going on. You grew up in the homeschool world. Maybe you are, or I don't know, conservative world. Anyway.
No,
this,
I was homeschooled
okay,
middle school, yeah.
But this reminds me of like people pushing, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but people pushing for like teaching creationism with evolution, you know, in like biology classes, you know. So is that kind of what he's trying to do? He's looking at the academic landscape and he's saying, wow, it's pretty left wing. I mean, it's only teaching this as the truth, and that's not intellectually diverse. It's not even intellectually curious. So our university systems have become silos of total leftism. The institution is totally run by a leftist ideology. So he's saying, no, if you're going to be, there has to be this more diverse thing where you have people outside of your discipline. Right? Is that kind of what he's going for, you think?
Not outside of your discipline, but you have to be exposed to multiple viewpoints within your discipline.
Okay.
So disciplines like sociology, for instance, are hugely dominated by Marxist theoretical frameworks. Mm-hmm. There are other sociological frameworks that are not Marxist.
Yeah. You
can't get a job in sociology unless you toe the line on these particular things, at least not in these state universities. So the issue is not defining creationism alongside regular evolutionary biology. The issue is, within your field, you are responsible for representing more than just the dominant politically ascendant viewpoint.
Yeah.
You have to give the full swath of what's being studied in your field, and you can't confine or punish professors for not holding to what is the current left-leaning ideology in your discipline.
And they have been.
They leave it to the disciplines in order to decide that, the faculty, the board of trustees, these other things. But ultimately, what shocks me in this story is the last time I was on here, I talked about Miltonian language when we talked about Kamala Harris and her abortion crusade about women's rights. Right? This is exactly the opposite of what it means.
Yeah.
Intellectual diversity is anti-diversity, right? In order to save freedom of speech, in order to save free academic expression, we must all think the same.
Yeah. It's kind of like how we save democracy by reducing the, a number of choices we have on a ballot.
Or we give emergency political powers to Emperor Palpatine in order to save the Republic.
So this is how liberty dies. Noam Chomsky, come on. Noam Chomsky.
Who's Noam Chomsky?
He's a famous anarchist.
Yeah.
Yeah, go read Manufactured Consent. It's great.
But it's funny.
I thought Chomsky was that black ball in Mario that...
No, Chain Chomp.
Chain Chomp. Okay.
You're thinking of Chain Chomp.
Wait. Noam Chomsky, what, Harvard professor, Yale, something like that? He's an Ivy League guy, yes? Right? Okay. I mean, he was kind of a darling of the left for a long time. I mean, he wrote books about challenging, 9/11. Before that was cool. But isn't he kind of on the wrong side of some of those issues now?
Some issues.
Just because that world has changed.
Anarchy is, there's a lot of people that disagree with each other inside of anarchy. Yeah, inside the left.
Okay, but go ahead.
There's a lot inside of Christianity. There's a lot of people that disagree with each other all the time. Yeah.
I've noticed.
Gatekeeping is not just for people saying rest in power isn't for you.
Yeah.
It's only for Chadwick Boseman.
Christians do it, libertarians do it, Republicans do it, Democrats do it, everyone does
Boseman. Who's that?
Black Panther, dude.
Black Panther died of pancreatic cancer.
Oh, okay. So he could rest in power.
He absolutely rests in power.
Gotcha.
You got to put the king at the end.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
So Noam Chomsky makes the statement that what the you familiar with the concept of the Overton window?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So what he's talking about...
But explain it.
The concept of the Overton window is, I'm going to rephrase it in Chomsky-esque language, that there's allowed very, very fierce disagreement between the two sides within a very constrained medium, right? Should we have a 15% capital gains tax rate or a 35% capital gains tax rate, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's arguing for the 90% or the 0%.
Yeah.
Right. So it's what you were saying.
So the Overton window shifts when certain ideas go from being totally crazy to being acceptable, So for example, Bill Clinton said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. I think he actually just said it should be safe and rare or something. But anyway, but now it's like it's healthcare,
Or like Obama said that
marriage
was between a man and a woman, and then he doesn't. Or how Joe Biden said that he didn't want his children growing up in a racial jungle.
Yes.
Or et cetera, et cetera.
So we can see how the Overton window has shifted. Yeah.
Overton windows do shift. And that is kind of a counterpoint to Chomsky, which is saying that there's very fierce debate within, a very narrow range of opinions. But that right there is kind of what's happening here when you say sociology. And man, I love STEM. STEM is the best. You don't worry about any
Science,
of this.
technology.
Yeah, STEM degrees.
But when don't you worry about this?
Not in the same way as the philosophies, the sociologies, the humanities. Dude, STEM is great.
I'll try to give a real simple example. Okay, so there was a book that was real popular when I was in college called Nickel and Dimed, and it was a book about
I had to read it.
A lady wrote this book about how basically the working poor can't get by.
It's hard to get by on living wage.
There was another guy who wrote a book where he's a young guy and he basically had $20 to his name and he went into a town and he lived in a homeless shelter and he got work. And after a year he had, $25,000 in the bank and a pickup truck and whatever. And he's like, this isn't true. You can do it if you work hard, And so it was literally the counter. Anyway, one of those books will be assigned in sociology. One of those books won't. Right. And so this, to put it at a real simple level, that what this guy is arguing is, hey, within certain fields, we should hear different points of view about these things and hash it out. I mean, that kind of is what, education is all about. However, I mean, and Tim Pool on his Culture War show last week, he had a whole thing about like, the university system, and a lot of the conversation was not very interesting. But there was one point that I thought was interesting. It's all going to go back to Vietnam today, because Vietnam was the point at which I think there was a mass recognition of the illegitimacy of many parts of our government. Mm-hmm. Okay, kind of had become manifest, and I agree with that. I didn't 20 years ago, but now I realize that was the case.
Yep.
Okay, and the universities at the time were generally kind of conservative institutions. But they realized, wow, like, all these like actual boomers, like baby boomers, are like revolting against, the elite class, our own government, and sending people off to war and drafting them into this war halfway around the world, et cetera. We need to represent them. We need to get some more kind of like radical professors. And over time, like the old conservative guard, retired, the radicals kind of became the norm, and then they hired more radicals and more, because they were always given a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. You either give them a seat at the table or they're going to make a whole lot of noise, and they're going to protest, and I don't know, Kent State or whatever. So over time, the whole system just got infiltrated. So that it's, I'm glad there are the Austin Freemans, who go to, we have some Christian universities where there's still some sanity taught, but a lot of universities, there is only one perspective. So I don't know. I think it's a good thing. This bill, does it have any chance of passing or what? I mean, I don't know what our options are. I mean, I'd like for us to just withdraw from the university system.
You asked, is any of this controversial? I think, Indiana, like the Senate bill, that's what I think is controversial, right?
That government solves the problem of its own universities?
Because of its own universities. Yeah. Who's guaranteeing these student loans? You can't bankrupt your way out of a student loan, right? They're federally backed, which means if you get a humanities degree and you don't make anything of your life after you get that and you're still working at Starbucks, guess what? The next person going to get a humanities degree is probably not going to get their loan approved. But the plumber, the electrician going to a trade school, they don't have these problems. There's not federally backed like trade school loans because they're good for it. Doctors and lawyers don't need their student loans guaranteed by the federal government because it's going to get a good return on investment. Yeah. So I think, the government is trying to solve a problem it created.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like a recurring problem. I will say the Texas Workforce Commission, last I heard, like if you got your HVAC certification, they'd pay you back, for getting that. They need people so badly. So
yeah,
anyway.
I'm waiting 2 months to get my foundation repaired in my house because they're so busy. By the way, any foundation repair people that are listening to this podcast,
yeah,
I want to push back on this idea that STEM is somehow immune to this whole policy. I mean, have you read Lost in Transnation?
Nope.
So readers, listeners, viewers, however bad you think the trans problem is in the medical industry, it is worse.
Yeah.
I mean, you have people for political reasons, for lobbying reasons, in professional medical organizations, biologists, psychologists, all of these people that are now teaching the most radical, ideologically driven positions about what gender is, what sex is, what is physically healthy for young children to undergo. And so read that book. It's a shocking expose about how politics has driven the fields of biology and the hard medical sciences in order to play nicely with the current political scene that says transgenderism is good. So sex is not a spectrum, right? Just because you have a person that's born with one limb doesn't mean that humans range in number of limbs from 1 to 4, right?
Yeah.
So sex is not a spectrum. Sex is defined by your gametes. That's it. Like even Richard Dawkins now is on the side of the Christians saying this is nonsense.
Yeah.
And is getting some pretty serious flack for it. But all of this stuff is infiltrating and has infiltrated the realms of every STEM field to greater or lesser degrees. What worries me about STEM, by the way, I'm a STEM advocate. I believe God has given us minds to be able to go out and make and do. And solve
we
problems.
need, roads and bridges and
sure
whatnot.
But the problem is one of the people that I follow on Twitter, her name is Zena Hitz, and she is a humanities professor. And the question was asked, why should we read Darwin? Why should we read Euclid? Why should we read Newton? What's the point? What do we get out of it? And all the STEM people are saying nothing because they've been superseded, right? Our field has advanced. There's no point in going back and reading outdated information. Like when I teach master's students, I have some master's students that have come from the fields of engineering or psychology or medicine. And I have to tell them it's okay to go back and read a paper that was published 20 years ago in the field of theology, right? You can go back, you can read Augustine, you can read Irenaeus. And they're like, what? If it hasn't been published in the last 1 or 2 years, they're just not used to feeling that it's relevant.
Wow.
And so in
the
one
exact opposite.
Well, yeah, like in one sense, I get that it makes sense. The field does advance. There are new studies. There are new things that are superseded. But the danger, of course, is losing our historical consciousness. If we're blinded and feel like the idea is that STEM is this constantly new, totally objective, ever pure realm in which ideology doesn't matter. I mean, Michael Polanyi, all these other philosophers of science say, look, we've been doing this all wrong. The scientist is part of the science. We can't forget that.
Yeah. In other words, they're not wholly objective. They bring a world-view into the work, and they draft
benefit
certain
of the
conclusions.
humanities, Ken, is that the humanities remembers that the human is part of the study. Yeah. The humanities has its own problems, but one of its own problems is not that it forgets the subjective element in its field. And I think that's the beauty of STEM is that it seeks objectivity. Mm-hmm. The danger of STEM is that it forgets that true objectivity is impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to think about that one. The medical one's interesting because while I halfway agree with you about the trans stuff that you were bringing up, I want to talk about like Swyer syndrome and how gametes aren't always, but like you said, somebody born without a limb, is not
prove the rule.
Exceptions don't prove the rule. Exactly. However, I want to go in a different direction and talk about obesity and heart disease is the #1 killer in America. And all of our hospitals are flooded with people getting end-of-life care when they're 50 or 60 because of heart problems, because of obesity. And, a lot of that is because...
Seed oils?
I was going to say, no, just we don't view sugar as poison anymore, right? Yeah. And the anarchist in me is screeching because the difference between an anarchist and a libertarian is the libertarian will be like a John Stossel and he'll say look, the #1 purchased item on food stamps is soda, right? And then people are dying from heart disease, right? And we're giving subsidies to the corn industry, right? Isn't the government incompetent and stupid? And the anarchist is like, no. It's not that they're morons. It's that they're malicious. It's that no, they don't. They're not
trying
stupid.
to kill you.
They're not stupid. They think you're stupid because they're getting money all three ways, with Medicare and Medicaid being the biggest parts of our budget,
right?
With the subsidies and the lobbyists that has a two-way street with the corn industry, and with the food stamps that has such a giant bureaucracy with the SNAP program. Yeah. They're getting paid three ways.
I'm an anarchist. You're right. I'm convinced.
So the trans stuff and medical stuff is a big deal, but dang, sugar.
I don't know about accountancy. You'll have to tell me about that.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Debits and credits have been around for a long time.
But I can see something going on with who deserves what and who's valid. I mean, we see this in jurisprudence. I was talking to one of our law professors the other day that the theories of jurisprudence has shifted, and it's very rare to have a natural law theorists anymore.
Well, actually, that ties into
natural law.
To the next article.
That up.
Thanks for the segue. I would just say to conclude that story, though, is I do think Christians really need to rethink what the value of going off to a 4-year school, except for Houston
Christian University is the safe choice to send your young men and women.
There are ways to go around the system. There are ways to avoid the system. There are ways to beat the system. You really need to look into it. And that's all I'll say about that. So okay, I want to talk about this article. Made a lot of headlines. This was on MSNBC. This is a Blaze Media article. Not a huge Blaze fan, but what?
This article.
Oh yeah. Okay, so this was a journalist. Her name is Heidi Przybyla. Hopefully I said that right. She's a Politico correspondent. She was on MSNBC, and she basically said, can you believe these Christian nationalists who believe that they believe that their rights come from God? let me just read her quote. Now, I will say she did add a little bit of context after this, including this kind of theory of, natural law, which I don't necessarily ascribe to, by the way.
I do.
Most people do, and I kind of do. Like, I think the law is written in our hearts. I think that we do live in God's world, which is a moral universe.
Romans 1.
Yes, yeah. Romans 1. We do know what is right and wrong, but we suppress the truth and unrighteousness.
There you
go. My only argument, I'll go ahead and cut to the chase on that, which is that I believe that God specifically, in letter of law, revealed His will. So I think we can overly rely on some concept of natural law where there can be disagreement, whereas the written word, I think, is quite plain. I think we would be better served, instead of throwing out the Old Testament, actually saying which part of this continues, and that's my drumbeat that I'm always going on. But let me read her quote.
You're such a Lutheran.
Oh, no. She said, the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalist is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God. Yes, that is what I believe as a Christian.
Outrageous.
Yes, crazy stuff.
I hope nobody in America ever believed something like that.
You mean like the whole thing where we're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
That sounds like some weird Trump thing that you just came up with. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so she was quite mocked, and what it kind of brings up is this whole question, this title, this word, this phrase of Christian nationalism. It's going to be around throughout the whole political election. I mean, it goes back to January 6th to a large degree. There is this concern that there are Christians out there who are also nationalists, who are combining these things too. They want theocratic rule for everybody else. They want to subject people to their biblical worldview and whatnot. But let's just try to get some things straight. Where do our rights come from? I mean, maybe she's right. Maybe rights come from the state. Is she right about that? That's what most people have believed.
Ken, what do you think?
Yeah.
I think I do kind of believe in natural law. I think, like, if God created nature and God is the God of nature, then like this natural law would be relevant to every single human. Of course, they don't come from the state, because the state gives you rights that can change their mind. I'm altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it further. Yeah. So no, the state is Darth Vader. And the Declaration of Independence is an anarchist document.
And Lando Calrissian is what? Freedom fighter? Anyway, go ahead.
No, he's a slave of the state that's starting to wake up.
He did cooperate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Declaration is an anarchist document. Let's go.
I mean, I think that's the beauty of the Declaration of Independence is it has a proper anthropology and a proper theory of what government is.
Right.
Like, people are inherently selfish. We have to protect people from...
But also people are like good, like they're valuable. They have value. They have intrinsic rights because they're made in God's image.
Honestly, that's the paradox that Christianity gets right that neither political party gets correct, in my opinion. I'm going to make a sweeping declaration here. The Democratic Party has a false anthropology, but a proper view of the duty of the community, right?
Ooh.
Human beings are generally good, and therefore, if we give them the right opportunities and give them goodness and justice, then they will make the right decisions.
Do you think that's a right anthropology, that people are generally good?
That's the wrong anthropology. The right view of justice.
The right application.
And then the Republican Party flips that, right?
Okay.
People are generally bad and selfish, and therefore it's pretty much up to you to make of it what you will, right? More hands off, because people are going to ruin things. If you give them free lunches, they will manipulate the system.
Yeah.
But the Christian system says this is about sacrifice, right? People are fallen. People are inherently selfish, but not completely.
Mm-hmm. But they have value.
People are inherently selfish, but they still have value.
Yeah.
And you should do this anyway, despite the fact that many people are going to screw this up.
Yeah.
That's the paradoxical nature of the Christian message about social ethics.
Yeah. All politics is, and it's a anthropological conversation. You tell me what the nature of man is, then I'll tell you what your politics ought to be. And so what is unique about the American experiment, it's why it's so brilliant, it's why I love our founding and are so thankful for our founding fathers to have put all this together, is that man is the sovereign. Not the king. The kings like to go around. It was actually interesting. We toured England and Scotland, and some of the kings justified their kingships by, hey, they're kings in the Bible. Okay, we're like continuing what David and Solomon and whatnot. Even though Samuel's like,
First Samuel is like, that's a bad idea. God said, don't do that.
Don't do that. But that's how they justified themselves. I mean, and their role. But a lot of the other kings seem to go back to ancient Rome, and they're kind of like, hey, we're reviving this empire here. And so that was kind of interesting. But anyway, in America, we are the sovereign. The people are the sovereign.
Correct.
The state's role is to protect our rights because we have negative rights. They don't give us rights. The positive rights are those rights the government gives you. Your negative rights are that which you can do by virtue of what you are.
Slight pushback.
Yeah.
I actually do think it's a charter of negative rights against the government. It doesn't say you have the right to bear arms. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed by the government.
Yes,
now,
thank you.
The Constitution is worth the paper it's written on. But
Right. If it's not fought for and defended.
I like the Declaration. Right?
Yeah. So anyway, does that make you a Christian nationalist, though, to believe that rights come from God? Well, if it is, so be it. The problem that we have in this whole conversation, and one day I do want to do like just an episode just on Christian nationalism, is nobody knows what that means. Nope. Yes, 10 people what Christian nationalism is, and they're Nazis on one end, and I don't know, peaceniks on the other, and So, but generally speaking, I would put it very simply that we live in this thing called a nation. Nations are good. Borders are good. There are certain reasons for nations, and ultimately, it's kind of like economics. It's about administration of goods and distribution of goods and representation. Anyway, not getting into all that. But as a society, as a culture, as a nation, you have certain things that are of ultimate importance. And so, what are those things? That's as a Christian, I think Christianity expresses those things that I think are of ultimate importance. So I don't think so if that makes me a Christian nationalist, I guess that's what I am.
Well, I think Christian nationalism kind of began in 300 AD, right? When the Roman Empire got in bed with the church. Before that, you have like Tertullian saying that like, shall a Christian carry a flag? No, it's a rival to Christ. Mm-hmm. You have him talking about like the blood spilled by soldiers is the blood of martyrs, that like the state comes to oppress the Christian and Christians have no part in it until, 300 AD when the Roman Empire becomes the Holy Roman Empire. And then Christian nationalism becomes a huge thing for the next couple centuries.
Well, I would say...
Well, when you read Tertullian, when you read the Church Fathers, the reason why you can't carry a flag, the reason why you can't go to the theaters, the reason why you shouldn't wear a wreath around your head or any of this other stuff is because it's an inextricable part of an idolatrous, demonic governmental system. So the reason why Tertullian opposes participation by Christians in government, including in the military, because the military had these idolatrous standards.
Because they had pagan gods.
Because it was part of idolatry. So open question then, what happens if you have a Christian nation?
So what did Tertullian mean when he said that Christ is also among the barbarians? After he's talking about the laurel of Caesar, that being adorned not with, leaves and ornamentation, but it's adorned with, it's bedewed, not with oil, but like with blood of martyrs and even of the barbarians, for Christ is also among the barbarians. What did he mean by that?
Well, Christ is among the barbarians. Christ is the savior of all people. So the Jews, the other people, the Scythians, the Greeks, all these other people that were outside the Roman Empire that are becoming Christians.
Yeah, Christ paganism doesn't scare Christ, but...
Right, so the whole point is Christ is among them in the sense that these people are Christians. They are now no longer servants to an idolatrous power system. Again, I'm not trying to advocate that Constantine was a good thing. I'm saying the context of the Christian relationship to government in the first few centuries, the reason why the Didache says, for instance, you can't be a soldier. Is it about being a soldier, or is it about being a soldier for an idol? I don't know. Yeah. You probably know more about it than I do.
Well, no, I'm a First Samuel type of guy. Yeah, where I'm thinking like, God said this is a bad idea.
I mean, so one of my professors at the University of Edinburgh, I used to live in Scotland, was maybe the foremost Christian ethicist and just war theorist in the world,
Ooh,
Oliver O'Donovan.
I'll look him up.
And he says, like I asked him this, I said, as an American, what am I doing when I vote? Because I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Am I attempting to say, well, this is our document, the Constitution. I'm trying to make a legal judgment as to what is in accord with the Constitution. So am I being a legal theorist? Or am I simply being asked, what do you think is the best way to run the country? So this was the question that arose was the one on gay marriage. This was back before Obergefell and all this. It's like, well, from a constitutional perspective, I can't see an argument for restricting marriage in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you have a secular pluralist nation, I don't see an argument for why that would be the case. But as a Christian, I see a very strong argument for why that should not be the case. And I do believe ultimately it's harmful to the human person. So when I'm asked to vote for this, what do I vote for? Do I vote for what I think the Constitution says, or do I vote for what I think is best?
And isn't that then a question of what are your ultimate values?
Yeah.
What would a Christian do, though? Would the Christian say you take a sword and you enforce that morality at the point of a sword? I just don't see Jesus saying, "Give to your."
The state does not hold the sword in vain.
Yeah.
In Romans, and right after that, he says the only law that applies to you is the law of love. Right? I think the Romans are reading his mail, and I think he's trying to be like, "Hey, don't kill us." Yeah, maybe, but
yeah. Anyway, I think this woman's. I don't know if it's naivete or stupidity or total ignorance.
Well, you said you felt like she was somewhat misconstrued, so it takes it
well,
out of context.
I couldn't find the quote, but she goes on to she basically goes on to talk about how Christianity can also be for trans rights or for gay rights or for pro-abortion. And so she's quoting like every progressive Christian out there, like these Christians don't have the monopoly,
the safe Christians
on what rights are,
like the ones that the Communist Party of China allows to operate, like the safe ones.
Yes,
yeah,
yes. So so that's an issue, and what we talk about all the time on this show, which is like, will the real Christianity please stand up? And so we have intramural conversations, if you will, or debates about what does the Bible say about these sorts of issues, and so she'll gladly use those Christians to to push her point of view. So we ultimately get down to authority debates and everything all over again. But at the same time, she said what she said, and that's something that can never leave my mouth. That these crazy people think their rights come from God. Well, if they don't come from God, if they come from the state, then the state can take them away. Do you not understand the problem that you're creating here? But as long as you're on the side of the state, I guess you're okay with that.
That's right.
I'll take a slightly devil's advocate view and say like the golden tablets view of like the Constitution that is enshrined in some of the American right is kind of makes me nauseous. The idea that Mormonism is the golden tablets view.
But you're saying like the golden tablet, or the Constitution was kind of
handed to us by God.
Might as well put it like after a revelation or something.
Right.
No, I think they get the anthropology right. So they get reality correct, and so that's what I would say. It took a lot of political philosophy to get to the point, and it took this unique moment in history where this group of people who were kicked out of every polite society in Europe, they had this opportunity, they had the will, they had a time, not to romanticize the revolution, but they were able to say, I don't think we want to be, an appendage of this empire. We want to be this thing, we want to be a republic. And they took advantage, and they had the luxury of fighting a defensive war, when Britain was, halfway around a third of the way around the world, and had other entanglements and so forth. So they could fight off the British, because whatever area the British took in the Revolutionary War, they couldn't keep it. They didn't have enough troops. So we would just kind of go in and take it, So it was a unique period in history. The stars aligned, if you will. And I think in that sense...
And great Cthulhu awoke.
Cthulhu?
What is that?
Cthulhu is an eldritch horror.
We'll do another episode.
Okay. Anyway, let's talk about Alabama's IVF ruling to round out the show, because I think it's quite interesting. It has a lot of pro-life ramifications. But long story short, the Alabama Supreme Court, this is from a BBC article, defined frozen embryos as children. And, so... I'm not going to really read a lot from the article. It had to do something with someone who is taking fertility drugs, and she's the kind of face of the story. But it had something to do with, I think somebody wanted to destroy their embryos and someone else didn't, frozen embryos, and someone else did not. And so then it became a question of, if they destroy the embryos or, when they destroy them, are they taking the life of a person? And the court ultimately basically said yes. So for those who don't know, IVF is in vitro fertilization. It's basically a process of taking a woman's eggs and a man's sperm, speaking of gonads, or gametes or whatever, and, injecting it in, what they used to call a test tube baby. And then when you have, fertilized eggs, implanting those back in the uterus, and hopefully they stick. And it's a very expensive procedure. So often what happens is you might, I'm not very familiar with this.
You'll have multiples at a time. You'll take a lot and you'll try to fertilize multiple ones. You can only use one at a time, so then you'll freeze the rest.
Or, well, sometimes they implant 2 or 3.
If you want to have quadruplets or something, this is how you do it.
But you'll also, miscarry. So you might implant 3 fertilized eggs, 1 sticks, 2 sticks.
Usually it's 1 at a time.
And so you might say, but it's expensive. So the more you can implant at a time, then, the less you have to go back if it doesn't take. So there's a lot of pro-life people who are, very pro-IVF because, hey, we're pro-life, right? And this is amazing technology that allows people to have their own children. I'm a little bit sanguine about it.
I don't know very many of them.
I've heard a lot of them.
Okay, cool.
Yes,
cool.
They've come out in defense of this ruling, or actually kind of worried about this ruling, because they're saying, so what happens though? Let's say you fertilize 8 eggs. Okay, you implant 3. You've got 5 left. What do? You put them in a freezer. And they sit. And amazingly, you can come back at any time and say, well, I've only have 2 kids. I want to have 2 more. Let's give it another go. The problem is what happens when these fertilized eggs, which is post-conception, which pro-life people would generally say that's life, sperm and egg together, new cell, new, that's a new life, new DNA. What happens if they stay in freezers perpetually?
Let's get murky because there are some, and agreed, most pro-lifers say conception.
Yeah.
Some, it's a minority, but some say implantation.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at...
there's a 2-week lag between a fertilized egg and it making its way down the fallopian tube into the uterus.
Right. And it doesn't always, when it makes its way into the uterus, it doesn't always implant.
Right.
In fact, most of the time it doesn't. Right. We have about 70% miscarriage rate in the human species, which means like if a fertilized egg makes its way to the uterus, it doesn't implant about, 70% of the time. And one of the frustrating things is that, to me, who is pretty pro-life, and consistency does mandate that I say, life begins at conception, right? There's nothing added to it other than
I would say anything after that is arbitrary.
Right. It's arbitrary.
Yeah.
However, you've got to deal with the fact that like 70% of the human species dies before it even like has a chance to stay in the womb.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a weird thing, especially
Say that one more time.
Like 70% of the human species dies before it ever even has a chance to stick around in the womb.
Nature takes its course, but isn't this kind of playing God? And what do we do about all those? I mean, I guess my take is something like this. If you're going to do IVF, you can only implant the embryos that you create. I think if that was a limit, if we had that limit to it, I think I can say,
Let's say that again?
You can only create the embryos.
That you intend to implant is what you want to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
So nothing goes into a freezer, and you don't throw anything away. That would be
the consistent opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I understand it's more expensive and it reduces your chances, and you could spend $40,000 for nothing. On the other hand,
or you could adopt.
Adoption is a real thing. Thank you.
That's my answer.
Isn't that what
more Christian?
Well, yeah.
We are adopted into the family of God.
It's literally all over the New Testament.
Yeah.
And so is IVF and again, I know people who not only used IVF, they used a frozen embryo 2 or 3 years later and successfully had a child from that, which is mind-boggling to think about. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad for that life. I'm glad that human being exists. I don't know what's going to happen to the other embryos. Some people will volunteer to give their womb for those children.
Probably not.
But very few. We're talking probably about hundreds of thousands or millions of frozen embryos at this point. What do we do? And so it seems like we need to I think it's okay in the pro-life world to say, stop freezing children, 1. 2, really think about your other options like adoption. You know, really give that a second thought. I understand the need to have your own biological children. I get it. But there is a fissure in the pro-life community about this, and I think it's too bad.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, I cannot see a way around the conclusion that the court has reached. Like,
it's an inconsistency
an
in the
embryo
pro-life
is
world.
a person.
Right. Right. And
Like,
so
that's
they're saying that. And,
Sorry if that makes your life financially harder, but it's a person.
Right. And what's weird is that it's the pro-life community who's kind of bothered by this. Yeah. I mean, obviously the pro-choice community is, but the pro-life community is bothered by this too, because it's like, oh, now people aren't going to do IVF, and to be pro-life is to be pro-IVF. I'm like,
well, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean,
unless they're the implantation pro-lifers, right? Who think that until it actually is able to receive nutrients.
Why can't we just pass a law that says IVF good, but you can only create the number of embryos, human lives, that you're willing to implant?
I mean, if we're talking about government subsidies for corn and for...
I know, right? I'm not sure I really want to point a gun at every single hospital and say, thou shalt not, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, we need more lobbyists. Well, we need more IVF lobbyists.
If there ought to be a law. If we're worried about costs,
yeah.
I mean, look at Japan. Like, 2 people in Japan die for every person that's born now.
Yeah, yeah.
Italy, all these other places. We've got a declining birth rate.
Everywhere, pretty much.
Everywhere. If outside the Christian world, there is a governmental case to be made for perhaps getting some subsidies for IVF treatments if people are infertile. If they're saying, I mean, back in the Roman Empire, after you had a certain number of children, you were free from taxes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's at law in Hungary right now. I think if you have 3 children, you don't pay any more income tax. So, yes. How about a pro-family political platform? That'd be interesting. Okay. I did have an honorable mention, which people can Google it and look it up. It's on the New Republic, which is a pretty leftist website, but it basically talked about how recycling plastic does not work. It's an abject failure. The plastic industry knows it. So I say back to glass bottles, right? You can't recycle glass either, by the way. It's sand, and we haven't.
No, you melt it down, you reuse it. It's pretty easy.
It gets everywhere.
It's coarse. It's irritating.
Okay.
Not like you.
Yes. That was a reference to what? Return of the Clones.
It's like that third Star Wars
Return of the Clones.
Oh my goodness.
It's episode 3.
It's episode 2.
Okay. Anyway, okay.
I'm never coming back here.
I eventually got it right. Okay. But wait, no, recycling glass is really problematic because to shred the glass, you have to have the same color. You have to do a lot of sorting. It's very heavy. Yeah. So to transport it is like a lot of fuel just to move it around.
And that's the problem.
And glass shredding is like really hard on machines, and it's a very expensive process. And by the time you use all the energy to heat up glass to a certain temperature to melt it, to reuse it, it's just a lot easier to make the stupid stuff. So anyway, glass is not bad for the earth. It is the earth. So forget the plastic. Let's go back to glass. And Milkman bringing us our nice glass gallons to our doorstep.
Those were reused. You put the empty ones back out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, let's go recycle and reuse them.
Yes, there you go. Yeah. Where can people find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. Dr. Austin M. Freeman, I think. I don't know.
Okay. Keep an eye out for it.
Yeah. I'm on Twitter. I teach at Houston Christian University, 7502 Fondren Road, Houston, Texas. I'm there most days.
hc.edu?
Yes, hc.edu, not HCU. That's a different school.
Cool.
hc.edu. I have a book, Tolkien Dogmatics, Systematic Theology of J.R.R. Tolkien.
And that is not a shofar on his lapel?
I'm going to read that.
What is that?
It's the Horn of Gondor.
Horn of Gondor.
Boromir's horn.
I have an I voted sticker. You can't read it from there, but I did vote today in the primary, so.
I don't vote.
No, you don't vote?
No.
You're one of those. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Why don't you? Am I going to participate in my own subjugation? No.
Oh, man.
No.
Well, you're consistent. I'll give you that. Okay.
Write in Harambe or something.
I have done a couple write-ins.
Gotcha. Okay. And people cannot find you.
No, I don't do public stuff other than this.
Gotcha. All right.
But Theology by the Pint, we have an upcoming in March. I don't know the date, but check out
Tuesday, March 19th. It's about scriptural inerrancy, infallibility, that sort of thing.
It's going to be awesome.
Fun. Yep. And I'm Evan. I'm the pastor here at First Lutheran, and I don't represent them, at all if I said anything, whatever. But you can find us at flhouston.org. Sarah, once again, you were missed. So do go to theologybythepint.org to learn more about Theology by the Pint and all the events and everything we have going on. Please feel free to subscribe and all that fun stuff. Until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.